When compatibility is not aligned, people can use their intellect to regulate their primal urges. And with good personal character, they can certainly overcome these personality differences and care for one another well. However, the most crucial aspect is that when two individuals have opposing constitutions, their dietary requirements will naturally differ, and that's precisely where the discomfort becomes quite significant. I mention constitution because personality differences are constitutional differences. When referring to constitutional differences, I'm specifically speaking about the tough-minded constitution and the tender-minded constitution. My companion animal and I both share the tender-minded constitutional type. Lately, with things like K-pop demon hunters, Korea truly excels and is very advanced in the media and entertainment sector. And with the K initiative, encompassing K-food, K-culture, and K-pop, there are indeed many areas where Korea stands out, but despite that, and frankly, there are some embarrassing aspects. For instance, when it comes to animal welfare or elderly welfare, we are still at a very low level in those rankings. South Korea is renowned for its large number of stray dogs, and the percentage of individuals who adopt a companion animal and commit to caring for it throughout its entire life is only about 13%. That figure comes from statistics gathered a few years prior. If only 13% of individuals fully commit to taking full responsibility for their companion animals throughout their lives, then it follows that the remaining 87% are abandoning their pets, whether dogs or cats, once they become old or fall ill. So, rather than shifting responsibility entirely onto individuals for these issues, just like with elderly welfare, the necessary social or national infrastructure is still not in place. I think these issues occur as that infrastructure isn't built. It's an embarrassing story to tell, but I actually had another dog, even before the one I'm currently looking after. This was sometime around the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. At that time, it wasn't me, but rather someone else in my family who really wanted a dog, so we brought one home. But then I ended up being the one taking care of it, and we just weren't a good match. Should I call it compatibility or personality? We just didn't get along well. So, when the dog was still young, we sent the dog for adoption to a new family that would suit its personality better. That was a case that happened. So, when it comes to companion animals, the compatibility between the pet and their pet guardian, be it a dog owner or a cat owner, is incredibly important. And above all, when there is an incompatibility, an individual can use their reason to regulate their instincts, and possessing good character might manage to overcome those personality differences and provide proper care. However, the most crucial aspect is when their constitutions are fundamentally opposed. Since their dietary needs differ, it causes considerable discomfort. I mention constitution because personality differences are constitutional differences. When I talk about constitutional differences, I'm referring to the tough-minded constitution and the tender-minded constitution. My companion dog and I both have the same tender-minded constitution, so now we have been living together for 17 years and eating together as well, and you could say that our good constitutional compatibility has been the secret to how we've been able to spend such a long time together. And so, I'm currently documenting and sharing through videos the K-foods that have really helped maintain the health of my companion dog, and though I'm not as incredibly old as my dog yet, my own health as well. I'm introducing these excellent food products to others. Last time I actually showed you a picture of my mother where her face was somewhat obscured, so you couldn't clearly discern her features. I inherited my mother's constitution. You inherit your constitution from one of your parents. Just like blood type, constitution is genetic. So if I have a biological mother, I must have a biological father, right? Both my biological mother and father had been remarried when they got together. I myself grew up in a blended family, you see. My mother remarried because her previous spouse had already passed away, and my father also remarried because his spouse had passed away first. So they both remarried after experiencing the loss of their partners. Now, as for my father's constitution, it is the tough-minded constitution. There are two types of tough-minded constitutions, as you know. There's the fire type and then the earth type. In Korean, that's the fire type and the earth type. In Sasang constitutional medicine, the Soyangin and Tayumin types are considered to have a tough-minded constitution. My father has a tough-minded constitution, and conversely, my mother has a tender-minded constitution. However, this tough-minded constitution and those with a tender-minded constitution don't find it easy to stay in the same space for extended periods. However, as I've noted, humans, unlike animals, possess highly developed rationality. Therefore, if you utilize that rationality to manage your instincts, particularly within human interactions, it would then be possible to sustain that connection. So, if we consider a tender-minded constitution as comparable to an animal, the way for both a tender-minded constitution and a tough-minded constitution to coexist and attain harmony is actually for the tough-minded constitution too. Constitution. As I mentioned, the functional differences in their 5 viscera and 6 entrails manifest as personality. They have a strong liver and are chronically strong-hearted. And as I said, having a strong liver means being bold, or as the saying goes, their liver came out of the belly. That means their liver function is overactive. Consequently, they tend to be more aggressive, more forceful, and rougher. The method to coexist successfully with such a tough-minded constitution is if both individuals possess a highly developed and noble character, then they can undoubtedly live together harmoniously. For humans, especially for someone with a tender-minded constitution, to achieve balance with a tough-minded one, a considerable amount of what is called qi is needed. Among the words used in the East, there's a term called qi, which refers to a certain energy. That energy needs to be quite strong to endure a tough-minded constitution. So it's not about physically growing larger by putting on weight, but instead about spiritually and physically improving your health to maintain a strong qi. It is extremely important for a tender-minded constitution to find that perfect balance between the two. Even if biological parents have opposite constitutions, it doesn't always mean all their children will be born unhealthy. However, when I looked into the parents of children who were born unhealthy, I found that in nearly every instance the parents did possess opposing constitutions, which I personally find a bit unfortunate. From the moment I was born, I was quite frail, and even as a child, my lips would turn blue due to an unhealthy heart rhythm. Now, during menopause, weaknesses that were already present become even more apparent, as the menopausal period tends to highlight existing vulnerabilities. Therefore, I'm experiencing considerable circulatory problems, leading to discomfort due to insufficient blood flow to my eyes and even my toes. From a child's standpoint, it is much more beneficial for their well-being if parents with a tender constitution marry those with a similar constitution, and parents with a tough constitution marry those of a light constitution. It is much more helpful. So in cases like mine where my parents have opposing constitutions, it can be seen as somewhat unfortunate. However, one cannot simply disregard fate, and since I had no say in choosing my parents, I must simply accept it as my predestined lot in life. Now, I mentioned that my father remarried, right? My father has a tough constitution, and in this theory, there's a formula. When parents who possess opposing constitutional types come together, their children frequently find themselves drawn to partners or romantic interests who also exhibit a contrasting constitution. And when individuals remarry, as in the case of my father and my birth mother, if the first spouse possessed an opposing constitution, there is a strong likelihood that the second spouse will also be of an opposing constitution. For instance, my father's initial wife, his very first partner, similarly exhibited an opposing constitution, which was a tender one. So, a person with a tough-minded constitution and one with a tender-minded constitution got married. If that marriage ended due to death or divorce, when they enter a second marriage, they are more likely to find a partner with the opposite constitution again than one who shares their own. Conversely, my mother's partner from her first marriage also possessed the very same tender-minded constitution.
같은 텐더체질이었어요.
He had a tender-minded constitution, but sadly she became a widow very early on. She became a widow, left all alone because her husband passed away far too soon. In situations like this, what's truly important is the profound stress, shock, and agony that accompany the loss of a spouse in life makes psychological counseling essential for healing. However, during the time when my mother and her first husband lived, such services were not commonly available.
첫 배우자라든지 그분들이 살았던 그때는
Back then, things like psychotherapy or psychological counseling weren't as widespread as they are now, so it seems like that particular aspect was likely neglected. So, when there's such profound shock, pain, and trauma, and considering it was a time when it was incredibly challenging for a woman to survive independently, I believe she was compelled to remarry. When such deep-seated trauma remains unresolved, psychologically speaking, you are in an anxious state, and anxiety attracts more anxiety. Since you're in an anxious state, anxiety naturally attracts more anxiety. Thus, there's a strong likelihood of meeting a spouse with an opposite tough constitution. That's what's written in our Jojen's 4 Human Types Research Institute's findings. In a way, it's almost like a predetermined formula. To truly transcend this formula, there's no other choice but to deeply understand your own unique constitution. Similar to how constitutional compatibility matters greatly among people, particularly between partners and spouses, and between parents and children, it is equally crucial for companion animals and their pet guardians, be it a dog and its guardian, or a cat and its guardian. This holds true even if. It's the same for things like food or food compatibility. The main focus I want to introduce this time is precisely this walnut right here. Would you like me to show you a walnut? Walnuts are indeed what we commonly call nuts. Nuts are defined as fruits that grow on trees and possess a robust hard shell or outer skin. We refer to these specifically as nuts. Looking at what we have here, you could also classify chestnuts as nuts. And now, if you look over here, these are the items that contain almonds. And this one here has almonds in it. And this cookie here also contains almonds. These types of items are referred to as nuts. Now, when you think of nuts, there's probably an animal that comes to mind. An animal like this will probably pop into your head. I told you to instinctively observe this animal. Does it look like a tender-minded animal to you? Or does it look like a tough-minded constitution animal? Yes, it's a tender-minded constitution animal. Animals with a tender-minded constitution typically have fewer opportunities to consume high amounts of protein or fat, unlike those with a tough-minded constitution. This is why they depend on nuts, such as walnuts, chestnuts, or acorns, and various other plant seeds. Here, for example, we can see sesame seeds. They have no choice but to supplement their protein and fat with things like these sesame seeds. So, I've said that foods beneficial for a tender constitution are actually harmful for a tough constitution. Because if you were to divide all the food sources on Earth, exactly half would pertain to the tender constitution, and the other half would be for the tough constitution. There are foods, however, that are compatible with both tender and tough constitutions, for example. We have staples like rice, and then there's also wheat, and then there's salt, and sugar. These are the main examples. Almost all other foods, once these are excluded, can be classified as either suitable for the tender constitution or the tough constitution. However, it is not true that every single type of nut or seed is exclusively suitable for individuals with a tender-minded constitution. Now, this is a food product that contains chestnuts. Then, this one here is an ice cream bar that contains walnuts. And this is a chocolate cookie, also with walnuts inside. Well, there are many nuts that are suitable for individuals with a tender-minded constitution, and conversely, there are also nuts that align with a tough-minded constitution. Therefore, it's essential to understand your constitution before consuming them. This can be understood as the study of Eastern food nutrition. In Western food nutrition, the emphasis is placed on ingredients and calories. However, in Eastern food science, which is also known as Eastern food nutrition, we consider the 4 key and 5 flavors to be exceptionally significant. When we talk about the 4 key, that specific key refers to concepts such as cold, hot, warm, and cool. It describes whether something is inherently cold, hot, warm, or cool. But it's important to understand that this does not refer to the actual literal temperature of the food itself. Just because this is an ice cream bar doesn't mean it's literally cold. Rather, it refers to the inherent qualities of the food itself. These 4 are what we call the 4 key. Next, the 5 flavors refers to the 5 tastes, which, as I'm showing with my hand, embody the essence of Eastern philosophy. And as I explained, it incorporates the core of Eastern philosophy, including yin, yang, and the 5 elements. These 5 tastes are also associated with the 5 elements: sour, bitter, sweet, spicy, and salty. San means sour, go means bitter, and gam means sweet. Then shin is spicy, and ham is salty. That's what they mean. So, with these 4 chi and 5 flavors, we determine the constitutional compatibility of a food and for which individual's constitution it is well suited. So, for instance, let's talk about the walnut, our primary topic today. I previously mentioned that specific organs are linked to each of the 5 elements. Knowing this, which organ do you think the walnut is associated with? This is where Western and Eastern philosophies diverge slightly. Western philosophy tends to break things down and approach them individually, one by one. In contrast, Eastern philosophy takes a more holistic view, lumping things together into a comprehensive concept, so it doesn't quite fit neatly into one single category. So it's often quite challenging to definitively categorize something within a single element. In some theories, this walnut is seen as being associated with the liver. In other instances, because it is linked to the bones and teeth, it is considered to be associated with the kidneys, and sometimes it's even thought to be associated with the skin. It is governed by the lungs, so some see it as being assigned to the lungs. In any case, this is a food that corresponds to the tender-minded constitution. So the tender constitution, as you saw, is wood, fire, earth, metal, water in order. So these are the liver, heart, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. Gan represents the liver, Shim represents the heart, Bai is the spleen, Pai is the lungs, and Shin refers to the kidneys. So for example, the liver is strengthened, and this gold is also strengthened. When it's a food meant to restore the functions of the lungs and kidneys, it becomes a food perfectly suited for the tender-minded constitution. However, in this Eastern philosophy, all the organs of the human body can be seen as being assigned to these 5 elements. For instance, consider the kidneys, which are the last of the 5 elements mentioned. The bladder is also associated with this particular element, isn't it? And also the reproductive organs, things related to male and female genitals, such as the prostate, testes, and a woman's uterus, ovaries, and breasts, are all considered to be associated with this. Even bones and hair are seen as belonging here. In a similar way, you could consider it to be the team leader or the head of a major overarching category. Furthermore, in the facial features, the ears are linked to the kidneys and the eyes are associated with the liver. Therefore, for those with a tender-minded constitution, the liver must be strengthened. However, for individuals with a tough-minded constitution, the liver should be calmed, as it often manifests as an overflow, which is also becomes another clue to distinguish the constitution. If you look closely, this one specifically indicates sesame and dried seaweed flakes as a garnish, whereas the other is identified as seaweed powder and sesame garnish. So this particular one here is from Emart, you see. And seaweed, which is referred to as sesium, can actually be called sesame. Regarding these powders, I am really fond of buckwheat noodles. These were meant to be garnishes to put on top of the noodles, but I personally don't eat them this way. I just end up throwing them all out. One is for a tender constitution, the other is for a tough-minded constitution. The tender and tough constitutions are mixed in this, and it's hard to pick them out with chopsticks. When it's difficult to separate them like this, I am left with no choice but to discard them. So, if I were the CEO of this food company, I would package the seaweed garnish by itself and then the sesame. I would package the garnishes, like the sesame seeds, separately. Seaweed is for the tough-minded constitution, and sesame is for the tender-minded constitution. If you mix the tender and tough types, it won't be suitable for either constitution. In such cases, eating them together could potentially harm your health, so if it were up to me, I would definitely package them separately. In Korea, we also press oil from sesame seeds like these and use it a lot in our cooking. Regarding food items, these two constitutions, the tender-minded and the tough-minded, simply cannot exist together in this way. Of course, regarding individuals, I previously presented an instance where an eminent Korean historical figure was featured on a banknote. In this scenario, one individual possesses a tender-minded constitution, while the other exhibits a tough-minded constitution, both being principal exponents of Korean Neo-Confucianism. However, these two individuals, although both adhering to Neo-Confucianism, diverge significantly in their theoretical approaches, causing their doctrines to continually run on parallel paths. Nevertheless, in human interactions, it is possible for individuals to engage in exchange and ultimately discover points of convergence within their theories. However, with food, you cannot simply mix items for both tender and tough constitutions, as it will not suit either. Therefore, you must never mix them indiscriminately, and I want to emphasize that for food, compatibility is incredibly crucial. Today's star ingredient is the walnut. Yes, the walnut. So now I am going to try feeding this to my beloved dog, Dilly. It says hodumaru. Even if the primary ingredient is said to be walnut, you absolutely must check the raw ingredients listed on the back of the package. Also, because there might be ingredients that don't match your constitution, you should carefully read the list of raw ingredients. I've read through it, and it seems to be a good fit for my constitution. When I say constitution here, I'm referring to the tender-minded constitution. This particular constitution includes both the air type and the water type. The air type is the air constitution, which is equivalent to the Taiyang constitution. The water type is the water constitution, which is the same as the sodium constitution. And then we have walnuts here. There are also animals that fall under the tender-minded constitution. It says hodumaru here, and the word maru in Korean can also mean the peak or the summit of something. So if you look here, it says delicious, the peak of walnut flavor, referring to hodumaljong, and it's because it tastes good. I'm going to attempt to give this to my companion dog. It's the hodumaru ice bar. Yes, my companion dog weighs less than 3 kilograms. Given that a pet weighing less than 3 kilograms means their body weight is very small compared to a human's. So, what kind of symptoms emerge when an animal ingests food that doesn't align with their constitution? For humans, it might manifest as a headache, but since dogs lack the ability to vocalize, they can't articulate their pain. Instead, they will experience diarrhea if they consume something that is not compatible with their physical makeup. Since he's only 3 kilograms, unsuitable food would have a greater impact, right?
타격이 크겠죠.
Currently, he's in the final stage of his life, so he can't eat moist food and I have to give him dry kibble. However, before he reached this terminal stage, I consistently shared the same foods I was eating. When I ate my meals, I would offer him some of my rice, and if I was having side dishes, I would give him a portion of those as well.
제가 반찬을 먹으면 반찬도 주고
If I was having some bread, I would give him bread, and when I was drinking a beverage, I would give him some of that too. Yes, for those with a tender constitution, I hope you eat walnuts and gain energy. For the tough-minded constitution, it's better for your health to avoid things that don't suit your body, so eating these walnuts isn't recommended. I hope this video has provided some good information for you.
This is a Netflix series called I Am a Survivor. It's an incredibly popular show on Netflix, much like K-pop Demon Hunters, which I brought up earlier. However, it's also a work that vividly exposes Korea's true colors.
한국의 어떤 그 민낯을 또 보여주는 작품이기도 합니다.
Just as individuals have their strengths and weaknesses that we must thoroughly examine, I believe that for any nation, while it certainly possesses its commendable aspects, it is equally crucial to address and confront its areas of vulnerability. If you observe closely, the principles of this constitutional type are explicitly manifested here. In the series I Am a Survivor, the trait of diligently uncovering and elucidating the truth is precisely a defining characteristic of the tender mind constitution.
그런 성격을 가진 게 바로 텐더 마인드 체질의 특징이라고 하면
Now, the tough mind constitution, as you can see here, is characterized by an overactive liver, making them audacious to the point of being described as having guts on the outside. Their heart is also very strong, earning them the description of being cold-blooded. Because of this, they can indiscriminately harm others. When it comes to killing people, causing numerous casualties through gun violence or engaging in random killings, this behavior is often associated with certain individuals. Additionally, this also applies to cults or individuals who manipulate and exploit others for financial gain. A substantial portion of them belong to the tough mind constitution. The reason for this is that individuals with a tough mind constitution tend to be quite financially savvy and adept at handling money. So then, the study of constitutional theories like this provides a framework for understanding. It becomes a valuable tool. If you watch documentary-style productions like these, you'll discern how the tender mind constitution and tough mind constitution frequently collide. And if the perpetrator embodies a tough mind constitution, it's often the case that the victim possesses a tender mind constitution, which is rather unfortunate. This also represents a formula that applies to all 4 constitutional types. So there are individuals who embody the tough mind constitution and others who fall into the tender mind constitution. You'll observe their personalities are starkly opposed, and this disparity originates from the distinct differences in their internal organ functions. Now, those with the tough mind constitution are physically robust and possess strong vitality. However, despite their inherent resilience, having a tough mind constitution does not exempt them from falling ill. It is only natural for an individual with the tough mind constitution to fall ill if they consume an abundance of foods intended for the opposing tender mind constitution. Conversely, it is an obvious principle that a person with a tender mind constitution will become sick if they partake in large quantities of foods suited for a tough mind constitution for an extended duration. In the previously mentioned production, I Am a Survivor, you encounter cases of harm stemming from cults, along with incidents of random killings and even serial murders. And in Korea, voice phishing is quite prevalent. The number of voice phishing victims is increasing day by day, is increasing daily, and in Korea, the proportion of those with a tender mind constitution compared to a tough mind constitution is starkly different, not at all evenly balanced. The tough mind constitution accounts for about 75%, while the tender mind constitution, a proportion that has been passed down through generations on the Korean peninsula, remains constant at approximately 25%. Consequently, Korea is a nation where individuals possessing a tender mind constitution find it exceptionally difficult to thrive. It's not just limited to voice phishing and cults. Recently in Korea, specifically on December 3rd, 2024, there was an insurrection, and even in such instances of civil unrest, the leading factions are invariably comprised mostly of individuals with the tough mind constitution. However, unlike animals, humans possess inherent character and are capable of controlling their instincts through rational thought. Therefore, even individuals with a tough mind constitution, if they have outstanding character, will not come into conflict with or oppress those with a tender mind constitution. They can live in perfect harmony without any abuse or mistreatment from others, which is quite remarkable. So the tough mind constitution consists of the fire and earth types, and the tender mind constitution is comprised of the air and water types. In particular, whenever Korea faces a crisis, this trigram here, which corresponds to the air type, comes forward. This symbolizes the sun. I'm referring to the Sun Constitution, also called the Tender Mind Constitution. Whenever Korea faced a crisis, many individuals belonging to this specific type, often the air or sun types, generously contributed with a philanthropic spirit, helping to save the nation and exhibiting this spirit of public service. Even though the tough constitution is formidable, with immense physical strength and vitality, I mentioned that the tough mind constitution can also get sick. The underlying principle of living organisms is found there. For instance, these are living beings, and living beings aren't brought into existence merely to be consumed by other living creatures. So, living organisms possess substances that provide self-protection, and these substances, well, if it suits the tough mind constitution, it's beneficial and perfectly acceptable. However, if it suits the tender mind constitution, it's fine for them. But if it's the opposite constitution, it would be extremely detrimental. This particular organism aligns with the tender mind constitution. Therefore, for an individual with a tender mind constitution, consuming it can serve as a beneficial tonic. However, if an individual with a tough mind constitution consumes this same organism, it could potentially act as a harmful poison. And it's not just this organism. This other organism is also well known for triggering many allergies. Likewise, substances originating from these kinds of organisms are widely recognized for their potential to trigger allergic reactions. This aligns with the principle I mentioned earlier, that living beings are not born into existence solely to be consumed by other living beings. The living food items displayed here are organisms that are indeed suited for the tender mind constitution. Therefore, when a person with a tough mind constitution consumes these, it can be detrimental to their body. If their sensitivity is dulled and their sensory perception is not functioning optimally, they might not detect that a harmful food has entered their system. Tough mind individuals generally have a tendency to be less sensitive. The tender mind constitution is innately more sensitive. Thus, individuals with this constitution frequently discern when food unsuitable for their body enters their system. In every country around the world, political ideologies are generally divided into progressive and conservative. Parties with a progressive inclination usually adopt blue as their symbolic color, while those from the conservative faction primarily use red. Indeed, colors carry significant meanings for us. For instance, the blue and red markings on my hand symbolize something. What's being conveyed here pertains to the 5 elements, as well as the 5 vital organs and 6 entrails, essentially representing the flow of 5 distinct energies. Wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. These colors match the ones on my hand.
같은 색깔입니다.
In this context, wood represents the liver and gallbladder.
상징하죠.
Next, fire symbolizes the heart and small intestine, and earth symbolizes the spleen and pancreas as well as the stomach. Metal symbolizes the lungs and large intestine, and water, the kidneys and bladder. The order here is the same as the color arrangement on this hand, which, as I mentioned, symbolizes the tough mind constitution. So, regarding the tough mind constitution, these two colors, this one and this one, are actually not helpful at all. The reason being, as you can see right here, this silver ring is a symbol for socialism, a silver ring that I always wear. In such instances, the tough mind constitution, characterized by an overactive liver and heart, often embodies expressions such as having guts or being cold-blooded. Therefore, it is crucial to soothe the liver and heart. And then, for the lungs and kidneys, signified by this gold, these organs are. However, given that they have a deficiency and their functions are weakened, both white and black colors prove to be more advantageous. Now, these colors, which serve to protect and strengthen the lungs and kidneys, are precisely the ones that are often more fitting for political parties that align with conservative ideologies. That's because there are many people with the tough mind constitution in conservative parties. Because progressive political parties frequently consist of individuals with the tender mind constitution, these hues can be perceived differently from a health standpoint. As such, this particular color invigorates the conservative tough mind constitution, while for the progressive tender mind constitution, this one. Color provides strength. In Korea, following the internal conflict in December 2024, when society became significantly more polarized, people were noticeably divided into two opposing factions, aligning themselves on one side or the other. At that moment, because I possess a tender mind constitution, if I were to illustrate this particular aspect with this shade, then the opposing side, which benefits the tough mind constitution, would be represented by this black color, supporting the kidneys. The tender mind constitution requires a color that safeguards the heart. That's precisely why. After that internal conflict, those aligning with this side include individuals with progressive inclinations within the tender mind constitution. Additionally, even healthy conservatives often find themselves associating with this group. When I say the other side, I am referring to those conservatives who are extremely far right, having very extreme right-wing tendencies. In such a scenario, I use the term the other side, yet in the context of constitutions, this side means the tender mind constitution, and the other side signifies the tough mind constitution. If something is truly the truth, it will eventually be revealed. It had to be true before the Common Era and must still hold true in 2025 to be considered true. It needs to be true in both the East and the West. This is why it's not ideal for medicine to be so heavily focused solely on Western medicine. We should also examine Eastern medicine. And for something to be considered truth, it must be true in both the northern and southern hemispheres. This suggests that if something is a cult or an erroneous theory, it should be evaluated to see if it meets a global standard when viewed from an earth-wide perspective. If a theory were truly sound, it would have been correct even before the Common Era. And we have to check if it's still valid in modern times. For instance, it wasn't that long ago, relatively speaking, that blood types were actually discovered. Until blood types were discovered, many people died over a period of about 150 years from incompatible blood transfusions. Similarly, with these constitutional types, much like the diagnostic machines for blood types, devices for constitutional diagnosis will eventually emerge. However, until that time, we can expect considerable confusion. Just as we don't transfuse type B blood into a type A person, it will soon be proven that providing appropriate foods for each constitution, tender mind foods for the tender mind constitution, and tough mind foods for the tough mind constitution, is as crucial as receiving the correct blood type. When you're embroidering on fabric, it's particularly beneficial if the fabric color is a deep dark shade. This is a piece of embroidery I made. I chose these colors because when giving a present to someone with a tender mind constitution, it's beneficial to select hues that provide them with strength, which is why it was crafted this way. Well, right now we have the K-food heritage, which is essentially the legacy of Korean cuisine. And I'm currently documenting things that Gawa and I ate and found suitable, as well as foods that Gawa's family ate and approved of. Also, when doing embroidery, it's beneficial to use fabric with a dark color. However, when selecting fabric, I disregard whether it suits a tender or tough mind constitution. Instead, I prioritize fabrics that ensure the lettering is clear and sharp. Therefore, I will be using both this color and this other color. When it comes to selecting the fabric, I'm simply explaining that I opted for a deep shade for this embroidery. It's not about categorizing by constitution, suggesting these two colors are specifically for the tender mind constitution. Therefore, any food embroidered with this color is suitable for that constitution. That's not the point at all. I'm merely selecting a color that ensures the text is legible. I won't be using this color to differentiate between tender and tough mind constitutions. The next thing I'm going to embroider is walnut maru. Since walnut is walnut in English and it starts with the letter W, I'll be embroidering on this specific fabric here, starting with this new letter, and I'll do it right on this piece of cloth. This food is for the tender mind constitution. This particular food has truly kept both my dog and me in excellent health. I truly feel it merits an award, if I may say so. Individuals with a tender mind constitution have fewer opportunities to ingest protein and fats compared to those with a tough mind constitution, so they derive these nutrients from foods such as this one, a 4. You need to prepare a piece of fabric that's the size of 2 sheets of paper laid out like this. This here is the pattern. When you draw the design on this, you should consider the following. Don't use a regular pen. There's a special heat erasable pen for embroidery. Using a heat erasable pen ensures no messy residue is left on your fabric or thread, resulting in a clean and neat finish, which is why I strongly recommend using it.
열펜을 사용하시라고 말씀드리고 싶네요.
Yes, this symbol here, in front of these letters, is indeed from the Korean flag. I previously mentioned how this constitution is symbolically embedded within the flag's design. Given that this particular food is specifically suited for the tender mind constitution, it therefore corresponds with the trigram associated with the Taiyang constitution and also with So-Iyum. I've indicated the trigrams related to the constitution here. This one represents the Taiyangin and this one the So-Yumin. And on one side, I will now draw this triangle and that triangle, symbolizing the 4 temperaments, also known as the 4 constitutions, from ancient Greece, right here. Then I'll draw a line right in the middle to delineate the upper and lower triangles, indicating them clearly. Next is the symbol for the air constitution. I'll add this diagonal line at the top. When doing embroidery, particularly with thick thread or a thick needle, it demands considerable hand strength. For that reason, it might be a good idea to wear a wrist support band while embroidering to help protect your wrist and make the process more comfortable.
것도 좋을 것 같습니다.